Welcome to Hiraeth, the home of modern Welsh politics.
Hello all, it's producer Richard here with a short message before the podcast starts. This is the second in our series of end-of-year podcasts that we couldn't quite fit into our normal rhythm of pods earlier in the year, but have some really thoughtful contributions from the world of Welsh politics that we'd like to share with our listeners. Recorded at the recent Labour conference fringe, this episode covers a broad sweep of issues related to the past, present and future of democracy in Wales, and draws on the considerable experience of former First Minister Mark Drakeford, now Cabinet Secretary for Finance. Few people have been there and done it in the devolution era as much as Mark has been, and we're grateful to him for the insight he shares here in front of a packed audience. Friend of the pod, Jess Blair, from the Electoral Reform Society, takes it from here.
Mark obviously needs no introduction. One of Mark's biggest legacies, at least in my opinion, has been as someone who progressed Welsh democracy, leading on reform as First Minister and making it a centrepiece of his government. So we really are delighted to have you here today. Thank you. A lot's changed over 25 years of devolution. I think a particular point of change for us came when elections were devolved to Wales, and you had the local government move slightly before that happened, but you were probably involved in early conversations about that. What was your kind of initial thought on how democracy in Wales could be strengthened and diverged from the existing pattern?
Well, just diolch yn fawr, diolch am y cyfle I bod yma. Thank you for the chance to be here. The room is full of people who've been on this journey, so I'm sure we'll hear from others too. Look, you are right. The moment at which responsibility for elections held only in Wales were devolved to Wales was a very important moment in our ability to put into practice some of the things that those of us on the progressive end of politics in Wales had long wanted to achieve. So there are a series of things, some of them predating that, others as a direct result of that piece of devolution that we've been able to achieve. Votes at 16. Julie Morgan is here. She had advanced that cause well before we were able to do it in Wales, but now we were able to do it, and so we did. Something I am very proud of is that we used that opportunity to allow citizens from other parts of the world who live in Wales to take part in Welsh elections. From the point of view of those of us who made that argument in the Senedd, those people, while they are in Wales, have every bit a right as anyone else to cast their vote in those things that shape the future of the place that they have been. We have been lucky enough to attract them to be part of. So we were able to do a series of things in widening the franchise. And of course, we have gone on since to a series of other and in some ways even more profound changes. And Mick Anthony also here, who took through the Senedd the legislation that not only reforms the voting system for the Senedd itself, but will allow us to move, for example, to automatic registration. It's a fact that people who are not as interested in all of this as people in this room probably are, but really takes people by surprise when you say to people, there are probably 400,000 potential voters missing from the electoral register in Wales. They don't even get a first base when you're trying to encourage people to take part in our democratic processes. They're not even there on the list to be able to do so, and now automatic registration in Wales will make sure that they can. We are living in an era where the impact of developments in the United States means that some political parties see the electoral register and the way in which elections are conducted as part of the electoral battle. If you can keep people off the register, or you can stop them from voting when they get to the voting booth, that's become part of the electoral battle. Well, I hope that in Wales we are on exactly the opposite end of that spectrum, wanting to make sure that as many of our fellow citizens as possible are able to take part in our democracy, and that when they arrive at the polling station, they are regarded as citizens carrying out a democratic duty rather than suspicious people who, by the fact of wanting to vote, have to demonstrate somehow their bona fides.
I wanted to come to another area of change that was made in kind of the first raft of reforms, and that was the ability for councils to vote to move to a different voting system, the single transferable vote. Councils had a deadline to change in time for the 2027 elections, which was yesterday. 3 councils took a vote on that. 2 councils got a majority, but they didn't reach the 2/3 threshold, with Gwynedd Council 1 short. 2/3 of the room actually voted. 1 person was missing from the chamber, so didn't quite get to the threshold. I just wanted to get your reflections on that, and whether you felt that threshold was still appropriate, and whether it was time for unilateral change for local authorities in Wales.
Well, first of all, for those who are, again, slightly less familiar, this is a system of permissive PR. What we did was we put on the statute book a power for local authorities to decide for themselves whether they wanted to continue with first past the post or a shift to proportional representation. The only form of proportional representation they could opt for was STV, and it's a product of the way in which government in Wales has developed since the very start of devolution. My party, the Labour Party, has never had a majority. We've always had to work with at least one other party in order to get the business of government done in Wales, and this piece of legislation was part of one of the conversations we had with other parties. We drew very heavily on the New Zealand experience, because this is how New Zealand has changed local government elections. There, the last time I looked, I'm probably out of date, just over half of all local authorities in New Zealand had opted for a proportional system, and I think only one has reversed that since. So, we were optimistic. Those of us who believe in proportional forms of election were optimistic that, offered this power, there would be local authorities in Wales who would take it. After all, STV is the strongly advocated policy of Plaid Cymru. Plaid Cymru run 4 councils in Wales, and you might have speculated that, offered a chance to do what they tell us every time they speak in the chamber, they wish we had done in electoral reform, they would have embraced the opportunity. Well, it turns out not to be as easy as that, because if you are winning under first past the post, you have a pretty solid vested interest in keeping that system going. And that turns out to be true of local government in Wales, just as it turns out to be true of other layers of government. What should we do? Well, my own view, but it is only my view, is that the threshold at 2/3, and it's not just 2/3 of those voting, it's 2/3 of the whole of the council, is too high. That we were too prescriptive in saying it's only one form of PR that you are able to institute, and maybe in a next round of reform we could look to liberalising the choice, let local authorities have a wider menu to choose from. I'm not sure whether a shift of that magnitude can be brought about by a simple majority. You couldn't in the Senedd.
No.
You would require a 2/3 majority, but there may be some intermediate threshold between one which clearly has defeated every attempt to bring about change so far, and a simple majority which probably slightly underestimates the significance of the decision that is in front of a body deciding a change of that sort.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we had instances in Ceredigion, for example, this week where we had members off because they were on paternity leave or for health reasons, and that feels like, when you've got 38 seats on the council, 2 people are already missing, that does then create a really high threshold to get to that 2/3. So that seems like a sensible approach. I wanted to touch again on something you mentioned earlier about the change of the franchise. We obviously have had one round of that for Senedd elections in 2021, but a very difficult election, the kind of COVID election being the first time this was introduced. What do you think needs to be put in place for 2026 to kind of increase the take-up of 16, 17-year-olds and foreign nationals voting in Wales?
So last time, half of 16 and 17-year-olds were registered, and half of those who were registered voted. So, that is not where we would want those levels of participation to be. You know, for some of us who were persuaded of the case to enfranchise 16 and 17-year-olds, the strongest line of argument was that this was a group of young people who, in the lead up to that responsibility being placed with them, would still be in compulsory education. So, you know, if you voted 18, many young people who have left school already 2 years away, you don't have direct ways of being able to be in touch with them, to help prepare them to make the choices that they will be asked to make. So I think what we need to do in future elections, including the next one, and the new curriculum will help us in this, is to use that opportunity of young people in their 14th and 15th years to prepare them for the responsibilities and opportunities of citizenship that are about to come their way. So if we do that, you know, it's never a matter in school of trying to persuade people to vote in a particular way, but it is trying to make sure that at the age of 16 you feel confident enough to be able to make your own mind up and then to express that in the ballot box. More widely, you know, we surely need to continue to find a pathway to bringing the form of voting in line with the way that people live their lives in the middle of the 21st century. This was brought powerfully home to me a few years ago now, when I phoned my mother quite late one evening. My mother was in her 90s by now, to make sure she was okay and to say goodnight. And she said to me, "Oh, I'm too busy to speak to you now." It surprised me really, because it was quite late in the evening. I thought, I know, well, what's, you know, I'm voting in a pop competition. So she was watching TV and she was using her phone to cast her vote for whoever she thought was the best. And I thought, well, if my mum can vote by phone in her 90s, then, you know, the way we expect people to vote, isn't it? You know, you walk an inconvenient distance to a drafty hall. You are invited to cast your vote with a pencil stuck to a flimsy, on a piece of string. 16-year-olds, this looks like the Ark, doesn't it? You know, this does not look like the world that they how they live the rest of their lives. So if we are to persuade people to be part of the democratic process, we have to bring the way we conduct democracy more in line with the way people conduct the rest of their lives. You know, there are barriers to that. There are issues of confidence in that. There are issues of trust involved in it. You know, if you go to a ballot box and you drop your vote in, you have a confidence in knowing you've seen it happen. And lots of people say that to me. Oh, I like to see that vote going into the box. And that's a trust-based system. If you vote on your phone, you're completely confident that President Putin hasn't voted for you. You know, there's all of that. So I'm not saying that there aren't some quite big issues, not just technological, but cultural and trust-based to explore there. But I do think we really have to go on that journey if we are to persuade those young people that voting is something that they recognise, you know, in the way their lives are lived.
I think the Elections and Elected Bodies Act is really kind of the start of that journey, isn't it, in terms of removing barriers for registration, improving voter information, for sure. But I did want to bring us on to Senedd reform now. We're doing a bit of a quick canter through all of the democratic reforms of the past few years and those still to come. But in terms of Senedd reform, as First Minister, you really kind of led the way on that. And Senedd reform had been something kind of on the table for a long time, discussed, but felt that it was going to be too difficult, like it's going to be put in a too difficult to ever do box, but kind of, you know, you led the way and made it happen. How did you bring the Labour Party along with you on that journey, to keep going on the journey metaphor? Well,
you're right. You know, the Richard Review, which was established in the first Senedd term, Ivor Richard concluded then that the Senedd was too small effectively to discharge all the responsibilities that it had. And if you look at the responsibilities that we had then and you compare them to the ones we have now, it is just a very different world. And still we are managing with just 60 Senedd members. I don't think there was almost anybody in the Senedd, even the Tories, who would argue that 60 people is enough to do the job in the way that people in Wales deserve the job to be done. So the problem has not been technical or, evidence. The problem has been political, because persuading any electorate that what they really want to vote for are more politicians is, we all know it's always going to be an uphill issue. I always remind people who make that argument now that if people back in 1997 had fallen for the same argument, there would be nobody in the Senedd. In 1997, we had a Labour government that was brave enough to face those arguments, and those arguments were made all the time in Wales in that very narrowly run referendum, but we faced them then, we made the case, and we can make the case again now. The opportunity came in 2021, because you need a 2/3 majority, and we had, if you added up all the numbers of people in the Senedd, we had an absolutely bare 2/3 majority to make it happen. So I did feel it was my responsibility, given the fact that Labour had done well in the election, we'd done as well as we had in any elections in the whole of devolution, to use that opportunity finally to make this happen. And I really did feel, and said to my colleagues in the Labour group, if we don't do it now, there'll be another 20 years while you will sit here complaining about the fact that the current system doesn't work. And you've got to have the courage to use the opportunity, and you've got to be willing, and I preached this sermon as many times as you can imagine, and I preached it not just to my Labour colleagues, but to others as well. You've all got to be prepared to be half-a-loafers. Nobody is going to get everything that you want out of Senedd reform. If you're not prepared to settle for half a loaf, for the things you can get out of it, if you insist on, if I don't get everything, I'm not going to vote for anything, then I can guarantee you it will not happen this time either. And that was the political effort, working with others to persuade all of those who could see that the current system shortchanges Welsh citizens by not giving them the Senedd that they need, that everybody would have to make a compromise in order to get the biggest prize of all, and that was to make the first stab at reform ever since the Senedd had been established. And I think with a lot of hard work from other people in this room, we managed to achieve that. And in the special Labour conference, I was told many times leading up to the conference that we would have a struggle in persuading the Labour Party to back this. It was backed by 86% of those taking part in the election, and that is, not an inconsiderable majority.
And now the legislation is in place, 2026 will look very different. More members, a different voting system, different boundaries. I might come on to the gender quotas part in a second, but the final package, do you feel members, including yourself, are happy with that? And how do you feel that will shape up for the election?
Well, I personally am in the same position as anybody else. Is this the package I would have chosen if I was the only person deciding? No, it's not. There are things I would have done differently. But is it a package that I can support because it gets me some very important things that I want? Then yes, absolutely it is. And they were, as you know, Jess, there were 4 fundamental issues at stake. How big was the Senedd to be? Could reform be achieved by 2026? What would the electoral system be? And if it were to be a list system, what sort of list system would we use? Those were the 4 really, big issues that had to be resolved. And I don't suppose anybody has all 4 things as they would like them. But if you've got 2 out of 4, or if you're very lucky, you've got 3 out of 4, then you've got something, I think, that is definitely worth voting for. The Act, again, Mick took this Act through as well. It has review built into it. So, it's not a system set in stone. There's an automatic opportunity to look back at it, and I think there will be fine-tuning of it in the future as well. But for something that successive Seneds could not achieve, that's 20 years, in a way, of a failure of political ability. We managed to do it this time, and I think that's something we should be, not me, the other people in this room who helped to make it happen, and people outside the room, people in the Labour Party who helped us to assemble that majority in favour. It's something I think people can be very pleased about.
And that review mechanism, you've already mentioned that you would like to see fine-tuning next time. Are there particular areas you think the Senedd should look at?
Well, this is entirely my own view now, right? This is nothing, this is not the Labour Party's view or anything else. But of the 4 pillars, the one that I would probably be keenest to look at again is the closed list part of it. Now, I am a supporter of closed lists for the first election. And I'm a supporter of closed lists, I think, for a very important reason to me, which is the issue of equality and diversity. Because closed lists offer political parties an opportunity to create lists for that first election, where our ambitions, certainly the ambitions in the Labour Party, to make sure that those new members genuinely reflect the Wales that we live in today. So, the Labour Party in the Senedd does not reflect the world we live in today. It's done fantastically well in relation to gender, and it's done not very well at all in relation to disability and to ethnic diversity. So, how do we use the opportunity to make sure that the lists have at the top of them people who represent that wider diversity? Once they're there, and they have a 4-year term to become known, to get established, to form a relationship with the electorate, then I think what was always a finely balanced decision maybe tips back in favour of open lists rather than closed lists, but in a way that many people in this room would find uncomfortable. Sad as it is, the evidence is very clear. Left to themselves, the electorate do vote for white faces more than they will vote for black or brown faces. They will vote for men more than they will vote for women. And if you have an open list in the first election, then those choices will shape that new Senedd. Closed lists give political parties a different opportunity. Once you've done it, I think the argument shifts. So for me, if there was something in those 4 pillars that I would look first, what would be my first place to go? It would be that.
You mentioned diversity there, and obviously gender quotas were initially part of these plans, but for many reasons have been withdrawn, and now non-statutory measures have been announced by the Minister, who's also here today. I just wanted to get your take on what would you say to parties who are thinking, it's not statutory, we don't have to do it. Like, what would you say to parties to really urge them to take this seriously?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say to them is they have excellent advice now in the non-statutory guidance, and Jane has worked extraordinarily hard with all sorts of other people to make sure that that advice, the non-statutory guidance, is as good as it can be, and that it is given the prominence that it needs to have. So, we talk about it a lot on the floor of the Senedd because other parties need to be, educated would be the first word, and shamed would be another way of putting it, into doing some of the things that the Labour Party has managed to do already. You see, this was a very strange piece of legislation, really, from a Labour point of view, because we were being asked to take a piece of legislation through the Senedd to fix a problem that we fixed ourselves, or women in the party fixed themselves in those heady days outside the Guildhall in Swansea in the twinning issue. We fixed quite a long time ago. The Labour group that I sit in has 18 women and 12 men in it. So, gender quotas, it's not the issue for the Labour Party. It is an issue for every other party, 2 of the other 3 parties in the Senedd. And I hope the statutory guidance will help those who want to make progress to make progress. And we have not given up. We have absolutely not given up on putting a statutory basis under those arrangements in the next Senedd term, if that is what we need to do. But the problem can be solved by political parties now, doing the things that need to be done to make sure that they select candidates who genuinely represent the diversity of contemporary Wales, and they've got all the help they need in the advice that's now available to them.
And I think it's fair to say that all of those in this room that work with political parties, apart from the Labour Party, I think we all have a responsibility to kind of make this case to political parties who are less inclined to do this. This is a really important issue to ensure that our Parliament properly reflects the people of Wales. We are going to take some audience questions in a second, but I just have a final question to finish off. We have a UK Labour government now in place, and we've done so much in Wales in terms of reform in the past few years. What would you say to the UK Labour government in terms of picking up this mantle and learning from what Wales has done, and what areas do you really feel that they should be on their radar?
Best to last, I see, Jess. Thank you. Well, look, I first knocked doors for the Labour Party in 1974, so I realised in this year's election that it was 50 years since I started to do this. And from the very beginning of my interest in politics, I knew that the Labour Party was the place that I would be at home in. I knew that I believed in devolution, and I knew that I believed in proportional representation. And I feel like I've spent 50 years in the Labour Party speaking on platforms where it's sometimes very difficult to get people to see the case you are trying to make. So what's on our side? Well, on our side is the fact that the Labour Party itself has now a policy of PR. There is greater interest across Parliament in it. There's the new all-party group being launched in a week or so's time, and I'm going to be there to talk about the Welsh experience. But we will be advocating for two things that we are very used to, and that now I think regard as absolutely natural in the way we conduct our politics, both of which are regarded as very alien at the other side of the M4, because we've been in a PR system since we started, so we're absolutely used to the fact that our voting system is designed to reflect the preferences of the people who cast their votes, even when they cast their votes in a way that we find very strange and hard to understand. And we are absolutely used to working with other parties. In Westminster, working with other parties is regarded as a failure of the system, isn't it? It's what happens when the system has gone wrong. In those aberrant elections where nobody has a majority, you're forced to work with somebody else as though that was a dreadful thing to have to do. Well, we've always had to do that. And it is hard work, and it requires hours and hours of talking, but to my mind, it results in better politics and better decisions as well. So am I optimistic that we can persuade a National Labour Party that won an enormous majority on a small percentage of the votes cast, that this is something that they want to turn their back on? It will be very difficult. But that doesn't mean to say, as I say, I've argued for it for half a century. I'm not going to stop arguing for it now. And I do think that Wales gives you all the evidence you need as to why a better system better reflects the views of our fellow citizens and leads to better outcomes for them.
And there's obviously votes of 16, automatic voter registration. All of this feels like something that, for a forward-thinking UK government, could be on the table.
Yeah, no, I think on those things, those sort of slightly around the margin of the two elephant in the room, yes, I think there will be chances to do things differently.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. That's the end of my questions, so I want to turn it over to the audience now. I have a roving mic, which my colleague will take around the room, so if anyone's got any questions.
Just a bit of a tongue-in-cheek question, really, and that is that I think Mark is absolutely right that the ability to have control over your electoral system is a fundamentally important constitutional point, fundamentally politically as well. Of course, the powers came out of the 2017 Wales Act. Plaid Cymru voted against that act. I just wonder whether you think they might have changed their mind now.
Well, look, there is quite a basic choice in politics, and it is between whether you are prepared to vote for something because it gives you some things you think are important, even if it doesn't give you everything you want. And by and large, Plaid Cymru's position has been, and it often is in the Senedd, is that unless they get the full list of things, they'd rather not support something at all. Now that's a perfectly legitimate political point of view, but it does mean you miss out on lots of opportunities. And the 2017 Act was a Tory Act. It was a Conservative Act. It certainly wasn't the Act that we would have wanted to see. But the fact that it then did give us some things that we've been able to use doesn't mean that we've turned our back on those things. So, in a way, I think it reflects a very basic cast of mind, and a different cast of mind between ourselves, the Labour Party, because we've been in government and always forced to make these sort of choices, and a party that essentially is still a party whose main experience, almost exclusively, is of being in opposition.
Okay, we had one down here.
Thank you so much. Very interesting discussion. I'm from the British Association of Social Workers, which Mark knows well, and we're very interested in how you enfranchise people who are most marginalised. And you've already mentioned, of course, younger people being able to vote, about the changes in the Senedd in terms of representation there and how do the lists work to improve that. I wondered if you had any reflections on what has happened or what more could be done to encourage people who are most marginalised, most traditionally disenfranchised, disabled people, people in poverty, to engage with the democratic process. How can democracy become more participative by its nature? For schools, the kind of how do you engage people and open up real opportunities for people to think, to vote and get involved.
Thank you. Well, look, I'm going to offer you two rather different answers. My first way, again, it's just my view. See, I am in favour of compulsory participation in elections. Not in favour of compulsory voting. People can turn up and they can write what they like on the ballot paper. But I am in favour of compulsory participation. I have always been baffled by the fact that we require all sorts of things of people as citizens. If you get inside your car, you've got to put a seatbelt on. And you're required to do that because you're a citizen of this country. And yet we are not prepared to make it obligatory for people to participate in the things that make the most profound difference to their lives. So my own answer would be, we should have a system in which everybody is required to participate, because then political parties would be obliged to come forward with policies that are persuasive and attractive to those part of the electorate who currently don't vote at all. And when that happens, you get a really vicious circle. People don't vote. Political parties are inevitably in the business of attracting voters. So the interests of those people who don't vote stop being reflected in the policy programmes that parties put forward. Because what's the point of putting forward policies that are attractive to people who aren't going to come out and support you? If everybody has to vote, suddenly political parties have an absolutely direct and vested interest in making sure that their proposals reflect the needs of those people who are furthest away from power and influence and participation in society. So for me, the reason for having a compulsory participation approach is it makes political parties then shape their manifestos in a way that are much more likely to be of interest to those people who many people in this room would be interested in. Assuming for a moment that we're not going to get to that in the immediate future, then for me the rest of it is all about trying to find practical ways of making voting easier. See, I was very interested. Mick and I were unable to persuade our civil service colleagues in the end, but I wanted a pilot scheme in which we sent mobile voting booths round to those places where fewest people voted. Just like an ice cream van comes round and its tune plays to let you know. I wanted a voting van to turn up on the street, and I'd have had a bit of music playing as well. And I know, yeah, I just we'd have had to find the right tune. I could think of a few, but so that people could just come out to the house and vote. You forget, if you haven't voted, and all the evidence is, if you don't vote the first time, you're much less likely to vote the second time, and if you haven't voted the third time, you're almost never going to vote. Part of the barrier is just fear. I knocked the door of a young man in my constituency in the election, and he said, "I'm determined to go and vote." And I said, "Well, that's great." And he said to me, "How do I do it?" He had no idea. And what he was not prepared to do was to walk into the polling station and to be made to feel embarrassed, because everybody else knew what they were doing, and he would stand around looking like he didn't. So, if you haven't voted, then something that we think of as absolutely straightforward, there are barriers to doing that. Now, if the polling station turns up on your doorstep and everybody else is turning out to vote, then maybe it's easier for you. So there are lots of very practical things. We're very unimaginative in the way we do it. The Tories have played the fear card that, any experiment is a chance for corruption in the system and for people to cast votes that they're not intending. I am much more worried about non-participation than I am about the tiny, tiny examples we have in the United Kingdom of voting, going wrong because people are determined to misuse the system. We should be much, much more worried about people not voting than people voting more than once.
I'm interested to hear you say about the voting van, because Nia and I, when responding to the Elections Elected Bodies Bill, when it was going through consultation period, also advocated for a democracy bus, but I think the voting van is a better name, actually, on reflection. We had a hand up there in the red cardigan, and then we come to Steve at the front.
Going on your point about the Senedd elections coming up and trying to get more people from diverse backgrounds to stand, I was just wondering, with the process being different, or people that have never thought of standing before, knowing how the minefield of what to do and when to do it, how is that being looked at to help people to put themselves forward so they're not change their minds and change,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, look, in my party, in the Labour Party, there's a lot of work going on. It's largely being led by women. Members Julie and Jane are both here, who've been out on the stump a lot recently, and we're here this morning at 8:30 this morning with quite a large number of women who came to a meeting, and a number of women from BME communities declared this morning that they would put themselves forward, because you're right, it's a big step. I'm always frustrated by the fact that, when I'm out meeting trade union colleagues, there are people who do work in their trade unions, representing people in the workplace, who've got such experience that would be good for them if they were to do the job of standing, but they don't recognise it somehow. They think, oh, that's just what I do every day. That's not very important or very special. And so, through our trade union colleagues as well, we are trying to persuade people that the experience they already have of representing others in the workplace is absolutely something that they should be able to turn to their advantage in trying to get themselves selected for a political party to stand in the election. So I think for us, there's a lot of work we're doing inside the party. There's a lot of work we're trying to do with our trade union colleagues. But the starting point is, in a way, the point you made, which is that people need a lot of encouragement and a lot of practical help just to show how you can get through what is quite a rigorous and demanding process of becoming a candidate, and to show that you've got many, many strengths and many, many experiences that will make you a very good candidate indeed.
Quite often when we debate devolution, it's always about devolving things to the Senedd rather than devolving things from the Senedd and down to local communities. And I remember, I think it was probably your first term as an Assembly member when you ran Ideas Wales, I think it was, and all the work that was done around how can we devolve power from the Senedd to communities. So I wonder what reflections have you got in terms of what perhaps the next government, the next Welsh government could do to kind of do that, to push powers down to people?
Well, I don't think we've been good enough at it, Steve. I think that's the first thing. And strangely enough, that even when you try to do it, it doesn't always turn out to be as straightforward as you think. So we've had an example already, permissive PR. It's been there for local authorities in Wales, and yet not a single local authority in Wales has actually been able to adopt it. I will be taking the visitor levy bill through the Senedd later this month. It'll start its journey later this month. The visitor levy, it's another permissive power for local authorities. It will give local authorities in Wales the power to charge a visitor levy in their areas. There are local authorities who are quite keen on it, but I wouldn't say that the voice of local government has been overwhelmingly in support of a power which is simply a power for them to choose to use or not. I think there are other things that we could and should do to make sure that things that could be more effectively decided at a local level are done in that way. I think there are ideas out there, and in the next manifesto I hope that we will be able to put a few more of them forward. And maybe the problem has been is that until we get a critical mass of these things, then the ball is slow to roll. But maybe when the ball starts to roll, then it will gather new ideas, and there will be more confidence as well, at the Senedd level, that there are other layers of government in Wales that can do things in a more effective way than if you try and do them all from the centre.
So we've got a lot of questions, but we have put some time aside for this, so we'll get through.
The question I wanted to ask was about the future of the House of Lords. At the moment, there's a bill going through Parliament which is modestly reforming the House of Lords. But the Labour Party is also committed to a more fundamental reform, to create a second chamber of the nations and regions. We haven't got a timescale for that yet, and we haven't got the details of what that might contain. But I was wondering what you would think, Mark, on the composition of that second chamber. And also, it seems to me that it's inconceivable that you have a second chamber which will be elected on first past the post. There may have to be some form of PR.
Can I just begin by thanking Wayne? Not everybody here will know that in trying to assemble a coalition inside the Labour Party in favour of Senedd reform, there is a powerful group of people in the party who are the members of Parliament who come from Wales, and it was always very important to be able to persuade colleagues in Westminster to support us on this journey as well. Wayne was always one of those and spoke very powerfully at our special conference in favour of it. So I was always really grateful for that support and that help. On the House of Lords, I'm a simple abolitionist. Goodness knows what do you need to know, really, about it. We should replace the House of Lords, as the Gordon Brown report says, with a second chamber representing the nations and the regions that has a special responsibility for safeguarding the Constitution, that deals with the Sewell Convention and all the other difficulties we've had in more recent times. It should be a form of proportional representation. There's always an argument about what it should be, but it clearly does need to be PR. Nick Thomas-Simmons, who's responsible for the first bill, was very clear that it was a first stage, that there would be a further stage in that reform. How much of a half-a-loafer are we prepared to be in this area too? There are some intermediate steps. I feel reluctant even as I'm saying them, because the case for abolition and replacement is so unarguable, it seems to me. But there are some ways in which you could, and I'm reluctant even as I say it, but as a first step, have a House of Lords which is indirectly elected in the first place, so that you allocate a number of places to the Scottish Parliament, to the Welsh Parliament, to Northern Ireland Assembly, to the London Authority, to the mayors, and you say, those bodies send people to the House of Lords. So they have some democratic legitimacy because they've been chosen by people who've been chosen. I would rather our fellow citizens chose people, and we got there in one go. Breaking the logjam of the House of Lords defeated the last Labour government, didn't it? And we're sitting through all those votes of Robin Cook, attempted and every one of them failing. So how do you break the logjam? And I suppose if in the end I would myself reluctantly be prepared to agree to something that made reform start to happen rather than finding ourselves unable to make any change at all. But the case for change and for more radical change is compelling.
It's profoundly difficult.
It's clearly been profoundly difficult. The facts just demonstrate that to you, don't you? And one of the big barriers to it are members of the House of Lords, because unsurprisingly, being members of the best old people's home in London, they are reluctant to be evicted from it.
So I'm just interested in your thoughts really on the closed list system. Obviously you said that you're in favour of it for this first election. There's a lot of talk, isn't there, about what that might do to the makeup of the Senedd. We saw in the Westminster election that 13 constituencies had second place reform votes, very, very high. And I'm just really interested to hear your thoughts to what that makeup could look like and what it might do to the future. Obviously, the way you were talking was sort of saying around parties using that to increase equality and diversity. And also there's been some question, hasn't there, about if reform are the sort of the people that almost were like the UKIP representation in the last Senedd. Will that mean that actually they don't take up their positions on committees, and actually will that set back democracy itself? So it's a wide-ranging question, and it's just interested in your thoughts.
Look, if there are reform members of the next Senedd, it will be because Welsh voters have chosen them. And that's very unpalatable for many of us. But actually, if you believe in the proportional voting system, the voting system is there to reflect the choices that people in Wales make. And if people choose reform, then they will be reform members of the Senedd. We've gone through this experience already. We had 7 UKIP members in the last Senedd, and they fought like ferrets in a sack from the day that they arrived. And I think the same will happen, with reform. It's a self-defeating body, isn't it? Because it has no policies, it has no purpose other than being vaguely against some things. The sunlight of democracy will shine on them if they do arrive in the Senedd, and the sunlight of democracy will expose them, I believe, for what they will be, people who are not there to make a positive contribution to the betterment of people's lives in Wales, but to just posture around a particular set of anti-politics ideas. Now, I hope they don't. We will be working very hard, other parties will be working very hard to persuade people that there is a better alternative for them, but if people in Wales choose to vote for them, you can't believe in a democratic system based on PR and say, but not if those people are chosen. So if they are there, they will be there, and we will have to use the democratic opportunity that provides to expose them, as I would see, for what they will be, as we did last time. And remember, the 7 people who arrived in 2016, not a single one of them survived in 2021. I'm prepared to have some optimism and confidence in the way the democratic process itself manages to deal with people who come with the sort of agenda that reform has.
Diolch am heddiw, diolch am popeth, Mark, Jess. So I'm a co-founder of a couple of groups, and one of them is Cymru Republic. So I want to ask a cheeky question, if I might, because Republic Day happened this year for the first time in May, and will happen next year as well. I should say that this is within the context of the Welsh Government, under your leadership, Mark, becoming a UK position of the future of the UK being for equal nations. Could the Senedd, the new Senedd, post-2026, in your view, declare Wales a republic before anybody else?
I myself have been a Republican for as long as I've been interested in politics. Do I think in terms of all the challenges that Senedd will face, that will be the issue that forces itself to the top of the list? I sort of doubt it, really. I'm not even certain what the constitutional parameters would be of that. You can declare yourself anything in a way, but would it make any practical difference? So, in the same way as I said in Wayne's question that the case for reforming the House of Lords seems unanswerable to me. The idea that in a genuine democracy, we don't choose for ourselves those people who represent us in different positions also seems to me very strange to understand. But I doubt that we will persuade that many of our fellow citizens that this is the cause that is the most important for them to embrace.
Could you put a timeline on it?
Hi, so as a young person, I realised that people my age, they're not expected to know a lot about the importance of politics and voting. And obviously people my age now, we're nearing the voting age. So I was just wondering if you have any advice on how I could educate other people my age about the importance. Because it just seems like they know nothing about it and they don't care.
You see, I think my experience is slightly different to that. Because when I talk to groups of young people, I find them passionately interested in political issues. It's just that they don't connect the things that they're passionately interested in with the political process. So it's, they don't see those things as political things, but actually the things that really matter to them, the places that they live in, the futures they will have, the threat to the planet from climate change, all those things, once you start talking to young people, really matter to them. What you have to try and do is to persuade them that participation in the political process offers them a way of getting those things attended to, because in doing so, they will meet other people who are interested in the same things. And I am the opposite of nostalgic. I think it is such a waste. To look back and think that somehow things were all better then. So that's the opposite of my starting point. But one of the things I think may have changed a bit in my political lifetime is an instinctive understanding of the way in which collective effort is the way that you make a difference. So the decline in trade union membership, for example, is one of the ways in which we've lost some of that ground. And the way I think you try and persuade young people to become involved is not to say, oh, come and join the Labour Party. It's come and meet other people who are as interested as you are in those things, because you by yourself, passionate as you may be about something, are probably not going to be able to change the world. But if you meet other young people or other people who feel just as much as you do, then together you may have a better chance of making things different in the way that you'd like to. And once you've done that, you've actually persuaded people on the first rung of political activity, haven't you? Because political parties are collective methods of trying to bring about improvement in the lives of wider groups of people. Now, it's for young people, I think it's trying to build that chain up for people. First of all, to get people to see that if you are passionately interested in something, that is a political topic. Politics is the place that issue gets resolved. And then to persuade them to try and meet up with other people who think the same thing, and then to build the next chain into being involved in political activity in that collective way. So I'm not saying it's easy, because there's lots of links in that chain, and some of those links don't appear so obvious to people as maybe they once did. But I think it's there to be done. And my starting point is always that I think young people are hugely interested in political issues. They don't frame their interest in their heads in that way.
I think that's a great question to end on. I'm sorry, I know there were other hands. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone, but I'm really keen that we keep this to time. I just want to say a huge thank you to Mark for spending so much time with us.
Thank you for listening to Hiraeth. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to subscribe, rate and review.